This is Terrablox. In this first video, I'm just going to quickly run through all the current features, and then in future videos, I'll do a deep dive into each kind of feature set so that I have more space to talk about the design ideas and principles behind each of the different areas. So this is the main screen. Right now there is multiplayer, but it's only really going to be reliable on LAN. It might work if you're able to forward this port, but that's not tested yet. More robust multiplayer will be coming in a future update. So for now, I'm just going to do offline mode. You can save multiple campaigns, and each campaign is really just a set of scenes. So I'm going to open my test campaign here. And here we can see the list of scenes in that campaign. So these are just different maps you can choose from. I'm going to pop into this main one, which is where I've been doing a lot of my testing during development. And of course, from this screen, you can also rename scenes, delete them, or create new ones. So here we are in a basic scene. You can rotate and move the camera, zoom in and out. You can see there's terrain that is all made of voxels. All of the lighting is ray traced, so this is accurate to emissive blocks, sunlight, ambient light from the sky, stuff like that. We have tokens that we can place in the scene and move around. Tokens can also carry lights. So if I move this guy into a shadow, you can see he's casting a light around him. Similar to TaleSpire, if you go underneath a overhang, it will cut away any blocks higher than the ceiling so you can see where you're seeing into that interior. If you can also hold shift, which will overlay a grid and then show you tokens through the walls so you can see where everyone is. And then you also have different camera modes. So by default, you have just a free perspective camera that can orbit and move around the scene. You can also switch to an orthographic camera, which just removes the perspective. There's also an isometric camera, which is the same as orthographic, except that it snaps it to 45 and 90 degree angles. So you can get that perfect isometric viewpoint. And there's also a top-down camera, which might not always work for all scenes. You know, it does hide a little bit of information about height and so on, but it could, still a useful option to switch into depending on what it is you're trying to do and look at. By default, when you move a token around, the camera follows that token. You can toggle that off over here in the camera bar. And then also over here in the sidebar, you can control the cut plane manually, and you can lock it at its current position. So even as you move the token around, that cut plane does not move up and down. Oh, and if you double click on the spots, that will also set the cuts. If you double click on a spot, that will set the cut plane to reveal that spot. If we jump over into ruler mode, this lets you draw rulers. The default is a tape measure, which just draws a straight line. Or if you hold shift, you can set waypoints. There's also a sphere ruler, which again, you set the center and then set the size. And there's a cone ruler, so you set the start, set the end, and then set the radius. If you want to lock that ruler and then be able to go over into other modes, you can toggle lock, and then that ruler will stay in place even as you move between different modes. Or by default, if it's unlocked, all your rulers will clear away once you go back into play mode. If we go over into build mode, this is where you can actually edit terrain. So a lot of the tools here are inspired by pixel art or voxel editing type programs. So you can add and remove individual blocks. You can also draw lines. Oops. Also draw lines like that. For all of the tools, including the single block, you can adjust the height, including going negative. So if I want to draw vines on the side of this wall, for instance, I can do something like this. And then we also have some other shapes like rectangles, ellipses, pyramids, cones, a hill or a semisphere, a full sphere. So that's actually a little easier to see if we make it taller. And then you can draw ramps and roofs, which are like a two-way ramp. So you can see this little preview is actually showing you which way the ramp will go. So if I draw out a ramp like that, and I'm rotating here with Q and E. Or I can draw a roof, which is kind of like a ramp, except it's got two sides. All of these tools can be drawn with hollow enabled. So if I draw a hollow rectangle, then I only get that wall. There is an adjustable wall thickness. So you can do that. For most of the other shapes, if you draw them hollow, then what you get is like a, you get just the surface. So we'll draw a roof like that. And the same thing for hills and so on. It'll become a hollow dome or a hollow pyramid, that kind of thing. Besides hollow, you can also toggle. Here, let me go to just a line here. You can toggle whether or not existing blocks get overwritten. So by default, if I try to draw through a space that's already filled, it will only fill the empty space. But if I toggle overwrite, then it will actually overdraw those existing blocks. There's also a toggle for whether or not these blocks emit lights. So here, let me draw a blue. Let's do an orange light here. Oh, it's actually quite hard to see if anything's happening. So let's turn down the sun and turn down the sky. There you can see that these blocks are actually casting light around them. And then we can see that because I'm in build mode, even though the sky is darkened, the build mode does lift all the light a little bit so that you can see what you're doing. It's also transparent blocks. And transparent blocks can also emit lights. And you can set blocks as no collider. So that means that when you move a token, those tokens can just move right through them. So that can be useful for plants, curtains, things like that. Popping over into paint mode. This is mostly the same tools. Oh, yeah. And then finally in paint mode, you can see the palette over here on the left. So you got 16 default colors. You have your primary and secondary color selector up here. So I can tap X to switch between those two. or I can click on this to set a custom color, or I can shift click on any of the palette colors to set a custom color in the palette. And if you do make a custom palette, you can save and load these to simple text files or reset it to the default. If I pop over into paint mode, all the tools are basically the same as what you get in build mode, the only difference being that we are recoloring existing blocks instead of placing new ones. So you still get a lot of the same tools where you can paint in a line. You can even paint in a tall line. And then what you draw can still be a light, it could be transparent, it could be no collision. So it's sort of like you're painting a material into the scene. For both paint and build mode, you also have an eyedropper. So if I highlight eyedropper, then I'll get the color and material settings of whatever block I click on. And in both build and paint mode, I also have a selection tool. So similar height control as the other tools, but then when I drag this out, I get a selection box, and that box can be adjusted or fine tuning. I can move it around with arrow keys or page up, page down to move it up and down. In build mode, what this lets me do is you can restrict building to only happen within. Nope. In build mode, what this lets me do is copy the selection and then paste it elsewhere into the scene. Before I actually paste, I can rotate and I can flip on the different axes. What's actually being copied into the clipboard there is just a string of text, so literally just a list of blocks. So you can paste that into your notes, or you can even go into the library here. So if I make a selection on, let's say, this guy, just this little random wall section, I can actually save that selection. Let's call this just wall. Put it in the test folder. So now I've got a test folder with this wall prefab, and I can paste that back in straight from the library. And of course, still rotate that and flip it, same as I could before. While you're in build or paint mode, you also have access to, you can highlight, you can toggle rulers to draw dimensions, letting you know the dimensions of what you're drawing. You can also toggle a build plane. So here I can move this up and down with the control up here, or by holding shift and using the mouse wheel, or by holding control and clicking on a block to move the plane to be in line with that block. And then while this is active, then stuff gets drawn on that plane. And if I change this to the north-south plane, then it lets me draw sideways like that. And again, I can still move that around to draw at different spots. Or I can do east-west to get this other orientation. And just to show what's actually going on there, all of the different tools have a new down while you're using that build plane. So you can draw things sideways or up in the air that way. Same thing for paint mode. So you can use these vertical build planes to draw on walls and things like that. The next mode is images. So if you're a GM, you can actually import images into the scene that just kind of sort of float as objects. So you could import battle maps. I'm using page up to move it up and down there. Also scale them. So you can import images to use as reference. They can be arranged in different orientations, depending on whether it's a floor plan or kind of depending on what you need to use it for. You also spin that around. So you can either just leave it in the scene and then build around it using it as a reference object, or you can actually convert it directly into voxels. So you can restrict it to colors from the current palette. So like that. Or sorry, I did that backwards. You can either sample colors directly from the image, so actually color each voxel, according to essentially nearest neighbor sampling from the image, or scoot this over a little bit, you can restrict it to the current scene palette. And if I import a different image here, oh, let me close the library too. All right, so if I import this little battle map, I can actually load in a displacement map. So I have a height map that I've drawn that matches this image. You can use that to make these images into little 3D height maps, including some options like you can invert it. And then when you voxelize it, it will actually follow this 3D shape. And you can either, so if I do sample here, you can draw just the surface like that, sort of following exactly where the image is like it was before. Or I can toggle on solid columns here, and then when I voxelize it, it will fill in those columns all the way down to the 0 of that image. So that could be a way to quickly generate just base terrain, and then you could even bring in other images for things like little buildings and things, and quickly build out large scenes that way. Finally, over in GM mode, we have a couple other tools. First of all, you have control over what areas have fog of war or not. Oh, actually, let's go back and show that. So here I'm going to bring the sun and the sky back up. Okay, so these tokens have been set as observers, which means that there's going to be line of sight calculations. So if I set occlusion to full, and then let that recalculate, you can see now that areas that can't be seen by any of the tokens are behind this black fog. That updates as you move around. Instead of a full blackout, you can have that be partial. So you can still see the terrain behind it, but sort of tell whether or not your minis can see it. And then separate from the line of sight stuff, you can also have exploration fog, which can also be full or partial. So here, let me set that to full for a moment, and then go over in the GM mode and hide all, just to reset the exploration. So now, only areas that have been seen by my tokens are revealed, and then as I move around, we gradually get more revealed. So exploration fog doesn't have to be fully black, it can also be partial. Depending on your campaign and your needs, you might choose to have exploration be partially visible like that. And then, of course, you can mix and match that with temporary line of sight. So here we can see this area is explored, but not currently in view. This area is unexplored. And then the areas that are fully visible are what my token can see. The vision system is based on teams. So here, because I'm in offline mode, I'm sort of in GM view. But if I edit this token, you can see that they can all have a custom team. And then when players join in multiplayer, you can give them individual permissions per team on whether or not they get vision from that team and whether or not they're allowed to move those tokens. So if you wanted to, you could put all your players into different teams and give them all their own individual vision, or you could have all your players together on one team, all your monsters on another. You could have multiple player teams, kind of mix and match as needed. And each team maintains its own exploration status as well. So when one team explores, it only reveals what it's explored to its own teammates. So going back in the GM mode, I showed that we can go in the GM mode and then reveal all or hide all to either remove all exploration fog or reset everything to unexplored. You can also select tokens, and when I select a token, then I see, as a GM, exactly what only that token can see. So here I can see that this token, has this visible area and has some unexplored stuff. But if I go over and click on this token can only kind of see this area, very small area around it. Also notice that when tokens are out of sight from each other, they disappear. By default, the GM just selects tokens so that you don't accidentally move them. But if you want to move them around just the same as in player mode, you can use the move tool. And then this is also the tool that lets you create new tokens. So if I choose token and click on an empty spot, this is where I can define a new token. So let's name this one Bob. Tokens can bring in any image you want. So there's going to be some characters packed with the download, just some little sprite characters, but it can be any image. If it's a PNG with transparency, it will use that transparency for the cutout. And if it's a bitmap or something that doesn't have transparency, it will use the top left pixel as the transparent background color. You can customize a team name like we were saying before. You can also customize the token color. What's your color we don't have yet? Let's make you purple. You can control the radius, so you can have very small characters that just take up one space, or a radius of 2 will be like a 3x3 circle. Radius of 3 will be 5x5, and so on. So here, let's actually make a bigger character. You can control the height of the standee. So let's make a very tall, like 12-foot character. And then you can separately control the height of their eye. So we'll put that at 10 feet. Or no, I guess probably 11 feet. And you can control how far they can see. So we can give this guy a very small vision radius. And then, of course, you can customize the light color, intensity, and radius for their token lights. You can choose whether or not they have vision and participate in the Fog of War system, whether or not that light is active, and whether or not they're flying, which we didn't show before. So let's actually make a flying token here. So here, this token is flying, and I can use Alt and mouse wheel to move up and down. And then as he moves around, he'll kind of stay at the same height as he started, unless there's, terrain in the way, in which he'll play, and he'll go up a little bit higher. And the rulers will show not only the distance that you're moving, but also trace little lines down to the ground so you can tell how high they're flying. And then if you have GM permission, you don't have to go over to this token tool. You can actually just hold control and then click on any token to get this little menu. So you can toggle whether or not they're flying, whether or not they have a light, and whether or not they have vision. Finally, in GM mode, you also have a fog drawing tool. So you can actually manually explore, or you can manually add and remove fogs using basically a paint tool. And then you also have a system called props. So when we're over in build mode, we can actually select, what do we want to do? Let's do this sphere, for example. So if I select this sphere and then hit Control P, that will turn it into a prop. So now a prop still basically lives in the block grid, but is its own separate thing that can be moved around like a token. To be able to move these around, you do need to have GM permissions, unless you actually assign the prop to the same team as the players, and then they'll be able to move it around as long as they're on the same team. And then if you are in GM mode, you can also select a prop. So see how this one is highlighted in yellow now, and hit Control U to sort of turn that back into normal blocks that just live in the block grid. Over here on the left, we did look at these very briefly before, but you can set sun intensity. You can also change the angle of the sun. So here we can put that at a lower angle, and then let the shadows recalculate. You can also change the color of the sun. So we can have maybe a red sun. And then separately, you have this skylight, which is sort of just an ambient light that comes from all directions. And that has its own color. So we can make that a much stronger blue, for instance. Oh, and actually, let's turn off fog so that we can see a little bit more of the scene. And then you also have just a generic ambient light, which casts light evenly across all blocks, no matter where they are. And you can control the color of this ground plane in the background back here. You can control the fog settings, the style of exploration fog and vision fog. You also have a control for where tokens are allowed to move. So if you set this to partial fog, then they'll only be able to move into areas that are either unfogged or partially fogged, or you can set it to where they can only move into visible areas. So here now, if I try to... So if I set this to visible only, and then try to move this guy, I can move to anywhere he can see, but I can't move into these fogged areas that he can't see. So that might be useful to you, especially if you have a token that has a very small vision radius. So let's give him like 12 squares, right? Let me actually delete that guy because he can see almost everything. Okay, so now this guy can only see in a very small area around him. And you might be able to use that to kind of limit where tokens can move. Again, this is all depending on the needs of your campaign. And then this last little section just customizes the ruler units. So the scene we're looking at and kind of most of the defaults are set so that one block is 1 foot. But you can change these to show whatever you want with whatever label you want. So if I wanted to do 1 meter per 5 blocks, let's say, now all those rulers will show that new scale. And that's true for the movement, the rulers that you draw, and the rulers that show in build mode. Up here in the token list, you can quickly jump around to all the different tokens in the scene. And If we were in multiplayer mode, this is where you would control player permissions. So you would see a list of players, and then you can checkbox for each player whether or not they're allowed to edit the terrain, whether or not they have access to GM mode, and then which token teams they're allowed to see and or move. And then the library we already looked at briefly before. But this is just where you can store all of your pre-made kind of constructions. And these are all just simple text files. So if you open your data folder, you'll just find a bunch of .blocks files, which are just text files that have literally just a list of blocks and what color and settings each block has. And then I think that covers everything. So you'll be able to find a download link for this from itch.io in the description. It is still in very early development, so I've been showing off all the features, and I think this could basically already be used to run a simple game. But like I was saying, the multiplayer right now is still just bare minimum. It's really only going to be reliable over LAN, so you might need to either have like a virtual LAN, or depending on your ISP and firewall and router and everything, you might be able to do some port forwarding, but that's not always possible for all people. So the next phase of development will be setting up better internet multiplayer. But in the meantime, yeah, try it out. Let me know what you think. And in future videos, we'll kind of like dive a little deeper into the different modes. And I can share a little bit more of my thoughts on why various things are designed the way they are, what's on the roadmap, future development, stuff like that. All right, thank you for watching.